And is from California State University, has read my book. She's a professor of philosophy and religion and very much deeply involved in the Dharma traditions, very sincere and loyal to it. So let's hear her comment.
I'm very happy to be here, and I enjoyed reading Being Different. I enjoyed it because having been in a philosophy department for the last 30 years, philosophy in most departments in the United States starts in Athens and ends in London. And when you try to talk to other philosophers and say, you know, there's a whole world out there that has examined questions of self, of reality, they look at that as though they're looking through a pipe. It's as though they have a pipe and they're looking up at the sky. And they're saying those other things don't exist. And they hold on to that pipe, this very narrow view of what philosophy consists of. And in Rajiv's book, he's trying to tell people, put that pipe down and look at the whole of the sky. That there is wisdom everywhere that can be brought into oneself, that can be understood, and that can be shared. And I feel that this book is a major contribution to the intellectual life of everyone. Not just if you've been lucky enough to be born in this culture, to be born in a Dharmic culture, but it is a book that everyone can enjoy and learn from and be able to put down their narrow pipe of assumptions, of prejudice, and really draw on the full sky of wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Very good.
I now request Shri Rajiv Malhotra to present the first copy of the book Being Different to our beloved Pro-Chancellor, Abhayamrita Swamiji. For the information of the students, HarperCollins has set up a bookstall just outside the auditorium. All books of Rajiv Malhotra sir are available here. After the talk, you can go through the books and purchase them here itself. Thank you. I now request Rajiv Malhotra sir to address the gathering.
I'm delighted and honored to be invited here. It's a very special place. I had my darshan with Ammaji this summer in California, where I visited the ashram, felt very inspired and uplifted by that. And I've ever since wanted to have an opportunity to visit this very nice university that you have. I think you're very fortunate to be students in a university like this, because not only are you learning to be really world-class technocrats or managers or whatever your specialty is, but you're also learning to be good human beings and good citizens and have the resources within you, within your own self, which already exist, but you have to recognize them and let them evolve, to deal with other problems, relationship problems, personal problems, decision-making, stress, all of those things. So it's quite an opportunity I think all of you have. My talk is on my latest book. It's got that black cover and it's called Being Different. Being Different meaning it's a book on how our civilization is different from the Western civilization. That's a very important point, because in the absence of understanding this, we often think that all civilizations are the same, or all paths are the same, or traditions are the same. But I show in this book drastic differences in points of view. Now, difference doesn't mean that something is superior or something is inferior. Like an apple is different from an orange does not mean that one is better than the other. I'm talking about difference as difference, very different. So for instance, men, women are different, but that doesn't mean one is superior. So in that sense, civilizations also have differences. Now, the West has dominated India because of colonization for such a long time. They have studied India through their gaze, their way of looking at things, their paradigm, their framework. And they have sent hundreds of scholars for the last few centuries to study us. So their perspective, their worldview on things has become universal. Everybody thinks that must be the universal truth because the West has said it. And this is a colonial mentality that we continue in India even after independence. Our scholars want to get their stamp that if the Westerner has agreed with my point of view, it must be valid. They would love to get their article in a Western journal. They would love to go there and teach there, or love to go there and be in a conference. Of course, there are fantastic things about the West, fantastic things that we should study, learn, every good thing we can. But we must know ourselves, not through their eyes, but through our own experts, through our own way of knowing ourselves. Because their way of knowing India served the colonial purpose. And it is seen either through biblical lens, or it's seen through a certain lens in the Western secular Enlightenment movement, which was a product of their history. Their history is very particular to them. And so that's one of the things this book does. It's called Being Different, and beneath that it says, an Indian challenge to Western universalism. So I've just given you a little overview of what Western universalism means. And Western universalism is how lots of Indians have seen the world now. We've started, it's like we've downloaded this, and we start functioning through the eyes of the West in the way we run things, our values, our clothes, the way we use the calendar, which is the Western calendar, a lot of our laws, a whole lot of things we've just sort of taken over from the West, assuming that it is the standard. But China has a challenge to Western universalism because China did not forget its history and a sense of who they are. They have a Confucian from the great sage Confucius. So they have Confucian thought, and they are claiming a Confucian approach to universalism, which is different than Western approach to universalism. So Confucian universalism, Confucian ethics, this is sort of the backbone of China. And they want to be modern and Western, modern and progressive and developed, but not in the Western sense. So if you think that you have to either be traditional and you cannot be doing well today in a practical sense, or you have to be very modern, in which case you got to Westernize and you cannot be traditional, that is not correct. Even China feels that it is desirable to be very modern, but without losing your sense of who you are from the past. So at least there is a competition of, they are also trying to challenge and contest Western universalism. So the question is there such a thing as an Indian alternative also? If there's a Chinese alternative, is there also an Indian alternative, considering that we have such a rich, grand past? And that is what this book explains, how an Indian universalism might be considered. Now, my methodology is based on the fact that for 40 years I lived in the West. I lived there since I was 20, now I'm 61. I was a physicist, then a computer scientist, then I got into business, marketing, management, all of those things, and then I left everything some 17 years ago to pursue this. And so I have been studying the West from inside, but never forgetting that I'm Indian, always looking at it from an Indian point of view. I've visited India 4 times a year ever since I left, so I never got disconnected from the soil of this country. And my approach to studying the West tries to look at it from a Dharma point of view, from the Dharmic perspective, what is different about the West. So traditionally the West has been looking at India And now I'm reversing the gaze. I call it reversing the gaze, which means from our point of view, how do they seem, how do they look, what's different about them, what's interesting, what's peculiar. So that's been a hobby of mine, even though I was in business and science and all of that, not professionally in the humanities or religious studies or philosophy, but that was my hobby. So I've done that. Now, we actually have a very old tradition in India called Purva Paksha to do that. The Vedantins used to do Purva Paksha to the Buddhists, meaning Purva Paksha means I'm going to study you. What is your thought? What is your vichar? What is your perspective? I'm going to study it. And then I'm going to give a response from my own siddhanta, means my point of view, my way of thinking, my theoretical framework. So this business of having Purva Paksha of the other and giving a response from one siddhanta is not something new that I'm inventing. It has been there since the time of way back. You know, the Vedantins had arguments with Buddhists, the Purva Paksha, with different other kind of Vedantins, Mimamsa, all of this has been going on. But somehow we forgot Purva Paksha, to do Purva Paksha when the foreigners started coming, starting 1,000 years ago. We didn't really do the same intense Purva Paksha on Western thought, for example. Some people did. There are some rare examples, like Vivekananda did, and Sri Aurobindo did, and Gandhi 100 years ago wrote a little booklet called Hindustan, which is his analysis of British civilization and British Empire. But we didn't do enough of that. And I'm trying to revive that tradition where using our Dharma as the basis, as the ground on which we stand, we very courageously but with respect see the other and see how they appear to us and what we find different about them. So it's not something unusual or rude or impolite or something undharmic, because it is part of our tradition to do that. A group of modern Indians have started gazing at the West, and they're called post-colonial scholars. But post-colonial scholars take a very secular view of the West. They're not taking a dharmic view of the West. So the methodology they're using to critique the West is the West's own methodology. So it is not our gaze at the West, it is in a sense the West's own gaze at itself. It happens to be studied by an Indian, but it is the West's own system of studying that the post-colonial scholars are using. And I studied a lot of post-colonial scholars, and so either you have Dharma experts who only study the Dharma, and they can write many, many books on what is Dharma. I'm not writing one of those books, it's different. And such people are ignoring their view towards the West, or it's a very superficial view. But the West is very complex. It has got many things in it, like Dharma has got many things in it. And you need to become a real authority, an expert, very well read on Western thought and history in order to do this Purva Paksha of the West. Otherwise it's very trivial and nobody will take it seriously. So this book is an attempt to take the Dharma very seriously as my viewpoint, and from that viewpoint study the West very, very seriously. The other kind of work which is done in India is post-colonial, where they are studying the West and evaluating and analyzing the West. But while they are Indian politically, they are not Indian civilizationally based. They are not really, most of them don't know Sanskrit. Most of these post-colonial scholars do not really understand Indian civilization in a deep enough sense. And most of them are trained and educated in places like Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge or somewhere. And so when they critique the West, it's the West who's taught them how to critique the West. So they're not really doing it independently. Now, as a result of this Purva Paksha, or reversing the gaze upon the West, that I have been doing for 15 years, maybe more, this book has come out. And this book is the first volume of 7. I'm going to write 7 volumes on very, very different things. So this is the first book. Now, this book, I'm happy to say, just a week ago, I got a letter from University of Delhi where I held a seminar, big room like this, MA students, and followed by a panel discussion. And they have decided to teach it as a textbook. So they will use it next year as a textbook. And then in January they've invited me to, there's a conference they're having of professors from 150 universities across India, and they've asked me to teach a half-day seminar on this book, so that many other universities might start adopting it as well. So this is the kind of thing that, and I'm interviewing a lot of people who have read this book, people from different civilizations. I just finished an interview with Mark Tully. He's a prominent BBC correspondent, loves India. He has finished reading this book very thoroughly. I am going to be interviewed on Doordarshan in a few days, and also University Grants Commission has a TV channel called Vyasa. I'm going to be interviewed there in Delhi. So the book is getting around with many kinds of interested people. In Bangalore, it'll be a huge audience at the Indian Institute of Sciences and Indian Institute of Management. And in Chennai, also IIT Madras is going to have a function for this, and various other places. Now, the book has identified 4 huge areas. After trying out many ideas, I came up with 4 ways in which the Indian civilization differs dramatically from Western civilization. Okay, so I'll tell you what they are. First, the Western religions are what I've coined the term history-centric, which means there is a linear history of prophets, and this history of prophets is the only way you can know truth. The truth of what God wants, or the ultimate truth, can only be known through this lineage of prophets. And the lineage stopped centuries ago, and that book is the one record, and you have to therefore access God only through that book. And that book is in the control of an institution, a religious institution, and therefore you are under the control or under the awe or under the authority of that institution to access that knowledge. And this is because God is so infinitely removed from the world that we don't have direct access to Him. There is no capability in the human being to advance and tune into God. It's like, like logging on. You can't log on to God and get the message. You can't become Jesus. You can't become the prophet in the state of consciousness and have access directly without anybody, any middleman. You can't do that. So this metaphysics of separation means that the only way we can understand God's will is through the revelations that happened to some prophets very long ago. And if we don't believe in the historical truth of that, then we are doomed. We're not going to make it. So, in our tradition, the history, the past record is to inspire us. Past record gives us some moral examples. But even if all the history were lost, according to our tradition, each one of us has the capacity, which we call the potential, the true nature of the self is Satchitanand. And the Satchitanand nature of who I am and who each of you is such that we have the potential of evolving our state of consciousness to a level where we have that experience directly that some prophet may have had or whatever. So we do not have to become dependent on a particular history. Of course, there are many histories of great people in our civilization, but we do not claim that any one of them is so exclusive and so unique that if some other civilization claims to have had an experience of God, we have to falsify it, we have to convert them, we have to go after them in a negative way. It is not necessary. We are relaxed that somebody says somebody has had a different experience and he believes in it. That's fine for us. It does not threaten us. Whereas the history-centric religions would be very threatened by any alternative approach, because if my history is right and this is the only history, then I have to make sure that I falsify everything else. And this leads to exclusivity claims, and this leads to fanaticism, this leads to wars and tensions and so on. And a large part of the conflicts of religions going on the international scale, I trace it to history-centrism. I trace it to the history-centric mentality and the unwillingness to make that history a little less absolute and little less exclusive and accommodate other points of view. That is a very important point of difference. So the first contrast is history-centrism in one civilization versus what I call Adhyatma Vidya, or inner journey, or embodied knowing, the knowledge that you gain here and now in the present moment as the self, not copying and memorizing the knowledge of some other guy thousands of years ago. So this business of being adhyatmic or being a self-actualized person as the quest is a very different path than the quest through somebody else's history. If you do yoga, which is more than just asana and physical exercises, but also gives you higher states of consciousness, you don't need to know the historical details of Patanjali who wrote the Yoga Sutra. It doesn't matter. It's like if you are a physics major and you don't need to know the history of Isaac Newton to be good at Newtonian laws. They just happen to be named after him. And if somebody says Newton didn't live, it really won't matter because you can validate the laws yourself. If somebody says Newton was, lived somewhere else or he was a bad guy, it does not affect Newtonian laws. So physics is not history-centric because physical laws are eternal and the people who discovered them are not the ones who created the laws were always there. And even if the historical details of these discoverers is challenged and questioned and toppled, it doesn't really affect the validity of the law itself. So our Adhyatma Vidya and embodied knowing is more like that. The rishis are people who are discoverers. But no rishi says that I have discovered something and you should believe me as the final rishi and the ultimate and there are no more rishis after me and you cannot become a rishi. Every one of you has the rishi potential. Every one of you has the rishi potential. And therefore, the historical details of this rishi or that rishi is not that important. It's what he says. We can create the same experience in ourselves. And therefore, our path to truth is very different than the one which is in bondage to history. History centrism is a form of bondage. And when you are in bondage to history, you are in bondage to one historical text and bondage to an institution, and that has been in fact the past couple thousand years of what has been happening. So the first, and I'll tell you how I discovered this. After 9/11 happened in the United States 10 years ago, they decided that they should bring a person from every religion and have him explain their religion to the government officials where I live. So a room full like this with government officials, they would bring some Muslim to talk about at the time of Eid, to talk about Islam. They would bring in a Jewish person, they would bring in a Confucian person, like that different religions that they were not familiar with. So I was called to be the Hindu speaker. So normally Hindus explain who they are in a certain way, but I always like to come up with something which will shock them, something which will be different, surprise them, get their attention. So I looked at this room full of very highly educated Westerners, most of them, all of them Jewish or Christian. So I said, hypothetically, let's do a thought experiment. What would happen if you lost all knowledge of the history of your religion? If you lost all accounts of history, what would happen to your religious life? In other words, everything that is written in a book about history, this happened, that guy did this and that, suppose it's gone. For some reason, it's gone, it's no longer taught, or you're raised in a place where they don't teach this, the historicity of your religion. What would happen to you? And I got so many answers of anxiety. People wondering, people saying we'll be doomed, we'll be in darkness, we will not know good from evil. I mean, they were really concerned. One guy even raised his hand and said, "How dare you take our history away from us?" Like I felt this must be like taking some substance where a person is addicted, and you remove the substance, this withdrawal symptoms. So I started saying, "Oh, this is history dependency." And I've created a withdrawal symptom by saying, if I remove this history, what will happen to you? So I said to them, but I come from a tradition. This is what I've come here, I've been invited here to explain my tradition. In my tradition, if you were to remove all history, the human beings can re-experience everything that the rishis ever experienced. Because every one of us has that potential. Now this is something very extraordinary for them. That every one of you mean to say, if I believe in Jesus, then I could actually have that same experience? I said, yeah, according to me, you could. So this is a very big, dramatic difference between history centrism. And I would like to request you to use the term history centrism. I'm trying to coin that term, and and give it some importance in the discussions. So history centrism is a slavery to history and to the history walas who are the people who made up all the institutions, the church and so on, very organized way. And ours is a sort of the rishi, the yogi, the person who's going on the inner journey, and he's not looking at the historicity of somebody. We study the history of Sri Ramakrishna out of great respect, but we know that that potential exists in all of us. That we study the history of various great beings in our civilization, but we never say that because we have this idea of Aham Brahmasmi, which means I am that one. I am that one. So I am not infinitely removed. I am not permanently and infinitely removed from the Supreme Being. So I am not dependent on a historical source. This is a very interesting concept. Since I am a computer scientist, I've also got an appendix in this book where I'm saying that history centrism is like God has got release 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 like that, you know. So first prophet comes and he gives release 1.0, everybody's on that. And then comes another claim that I am the new prophet, I've heard this from God. So now his release 2.0 and he wants to upgrade everybody and he wants you to download it. But some people stay on the old release, some are on the new release. So the guy on the new release is always fighting and saying that other thing is no good, is not good anymore. Then somebody comes with the release 3.0. So it's a historical transmission through this. And then somebody comes and declares it's final. This is it. Now I've got release, you know, it's like Windows 3 or 4 and this is it. If anybody dare say that he's got insight or a higher level of knowledge, then we have to go after him, stone him to death and kill him because he's disobeying the law, that this is the final. So there is also a final release kind of idea. Now in that, you can't evolve. You cannot go further. And so our tradition says, you can always, in a certain state of consciousness, dial in and download the release. The release is not like only one guy got it. Everyone can tune in. Everyone can tune into the radio station and get the same broadcast. Everyone can tune into the particular website and download it. And the point is that it is always available to everybody. There is nothing exclusive that somebody can control. And you do not need to go to the history of one guy who downloaded it 1,000 years ago and say, okay, I have to learn his story and, whatever his experience of that moment was, I have to just accept it. I can have that experience myself. So this is one of the 4 very big changes. I won't go through all of them in detail because I would encourage that you read the book. Even if you get one of these 4 differences, if you truly understand it, it can transform you. Believe me, it can transform your whole way of thinking. So when you take one chapter, read it slowly and read it a second time and think about it. Send me an email with your questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. And if you don't need to master all these differences I'm talking about between the civilizations, but if you can master any one of them or at least get an appreciation, it can change you quite a bit. Another difference out of the 4 is that there are certain words in Sanskrit that have no equivalent in English. They're non-translatable. They're just not translatable. Like I give the example that, Shakti is not electricity or energy. The meaning of Shakti is so vast. It includes energy, it includes intelligence. Shakti is inside, it's outside. It's just Dharma cannot be translated as religion. A very big discussion on how Dharma differs from religion. Atman cannot be translated as soul. Because souls don't reincarnate in the biblical system, they don't reincarnate. And animals don't have souls, and plants don't have souls. And soul cannot say, Aham Brahmasmi means we are one with the divine, with the God. We can't say that. So this separation of soul from God, distinction, difference, dualism is not applicable to Atman. Therefore, translating certain words from Sanskrit into English, which has become very fashionable because we got colonized and we accepted Western universalism. So if they found something similar to their way of thinking, they said it must be that, and they translated it like that. So for instance, to them religion is something that an authority, an institution, controls and you are a member of a group that goes to an authority to learn religion, and there's a book, and that book has to be followed, and there are some historical events that happen which are closed, they won't happen again. So they went looking for these things in our tradition and translated them to fit their profile, their framework. And so this is, the sad thing is that we have accepted that kind of a paradigm for ourselves. So I challenge and question in this history centrism, in the first difference is history centrism versus embodied knowing I talked about, and the second difference is that Sanskrit words. Now I know that most of you the medium of instruction is English, and I'm not challenging that. I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But there are certain words, like 20 words, particular 20 words of Sanskrit I've introduced in this book. And I've explained that the common equivalent in English is not a good translation. It is not. You should use this Sanskrit word as itself. Like you have no problem saying yoga. You do not say yoga, you do not replace it with exercise or gymnastics or something else. Yoga is yoga. So similarly, there are many words I'm describing in this book which should be introduced into the English language without translation. They should just become part of the English language. So those words and the rich context of meaning is preserved. And this way, you can be speaking English, but you use those words because that Sanskrit word is very rich, very deep, and people are then forced to understand what does it mean. If you replace it with the English equivalent, then you are making the Sanskrit obsolete, and the whole Sanskriti, which is a civilization built on that, you are making it obsolete. So I won't go into what the other two are. Well, I'll tell you one more and then I'll stop because I want to have question answers and other people's comments. One of the things I noticed in 40 years living in the West is that the Western person was not so comfortable dealing with a huge amount of complexity. They had fear of chaos. So, whereas I felt the Indians were able to handle uncertainty, unpredictable things, power suddenly goes off, okay fine, you come back, kind of thing. So Indians are more accepting of things that the Westerner is really bothered by. A very good example is if I was conducting a meeting where there would be 6-7 Indians and a few Westerners. The Indians, everybody talking to everybody else simultaneously. So A is talking to B, C is talking to D, A is talking to C and E together. And after a while they filter out what and come up with, okay, this is what we decided. Then when I would go around asking everybody what do you think of the meeting, the Westerners would say, I don't know what the heck happened. I don't know what is going on. It's chaos. So this idea of linear thinking versus parallel thinking is a big difference between the two civilizations. The Indian civilization, I have a section which I say is the forest civilization and the Western is desert civilization. Because all the three Abrahamic religions came out of the desert. And the Indian civilization came out of forests. The rishis living in forests. Forest is very complex. Desert is very simple. Desert has got very few things. Very few, like God gives you only 10 commandments. Now you cannot even run a university with 10 rules. You cannot even run your house with just 10 rules. It is how can the whole universe be with just 10 things? So the forest is very complex. Every square inch, if you look deep, you will find so many things inside it. There are so many entities that are coexisting, and it is not chaos because they are all relaxed. They are all doing their thing, and so the diversity in the forest is huge, and it is not static. The forest is changing from one moment to the next. Things are moving. Animals, creatures, the trees are changing. Desert is same. You come next day, same. It's the same. It's got sand. It's got a few things. Same desert. So desert is static, not dynamic. Desert is fixed. Desert, the boundaries are very clear between this thing and that thing because there are very few objects. And the desert is simple in terms of the amount of complexity. So I am saying that this analogy works because our civilization evolved in very complex environment, geographical complex environment, which we've internalized to live with this very complex situation. So many sounds, so many kinds of things going on. So, simultaneously things happening, good, bad, opposite, everything, and we have to figure it out, we have to feel comfortable with it. This idea came to me long ago, but it crystallized as a very significant point when I was attending the Kumbh Mela in Haridwar. Now, tens of millions of people gather. There's so many things happening. There's Naga sadhus there, there's people eating, there's people bathing, there's people playing some band, there's some procession going on. All kind of things happening in a Mela. It's a mega Mela, largest Mela in the world. So, as I was about to leave, giving my respect to Swami Avdeshanandji, who was head of the Juna Akhada, which is a large gathering of Naga sadhus. So as I was leaving that, he was being interviewed by a TV crew from the United States, ABC News. ABC is a big network, and it has a Sunday morning show. And the Sunday morning show sent this crew to make a documentary on Kumbh Mela. So they had been there for a month interviewing different people. So when they were interviewing Swamiji, I was leaving. Swamiji says, no, you wait. And he asked them, please interview this man. He'll have something different. He'll have his own perspective. They wanted to know what is the perspective on Kumbh Mela. They wanted to make a documentary. So when my interview started, this guy says, so Mr. Malhotra, what I've been asking everybody, I'll ask you, how do we explain to Americans, we've been here a month and there's so much going on, we can't figure it out, and we've asked so many people. But I have to go back in my documentary, I have to explain what is this chaos all about. So I said to him, the chaos is your cognitive state, your mind wanting simple things, and you have information overload, you have cognitive overload, you have more complexity coming than you can handle. Your models are crashing. It's when your system crashes, you say chaos, because you cannot deal with it. So chaos is not out there, it's in here, in you. Now he thought it was very interesting. I must say he was not upset or anything. He thought it was very interesting. So what was supposed to be a 5-minute comment that he was getting turned into a 3-hour interview, and they played 7 minutes. They had a documentary slot, so they played on their TV network, my interview with them. So what I said to them is that you're saying it's all chaos, but look at one guy. Now he's very relaxed. He's not feeling anxious about any chaos. He's just doing his thing. This guy is doing something else. So they're accepting what is, and they're all going about doing their thing. You have simple models that you are coming wired with, simple models, not too complex, and predictability, and no uncertainty, and everything is yes, no, black, white, binary choices. And therefore, what you have to tell the Americans is that they have a certain psychological approach and a certain mental attitude such that a lot of other civilizations, particularly in Asia, will appear chaotic to them, but that is not a description of those civilizations, it's a description of your approach to seeing them. That's what I told them. So this whole chapter, and the cover of the book is Samudra Manthan, which means the Devas and the Asuras, they are churning the ocean of creativity, which means opposites cooperating. So in our civilizations, opposites can exist together. We don't have to eliminate one, finish it off. We can have this and we can have the other one also. So we are okay. So it's like, when we eat a meal, the Western system is you eat one course at a time. You have one course, they come clean the plate, they give you a second course. The idea is a thali or a whole lot of things, is very complex. What do I do? Do I eat this one, that one? What are you telling me? So I have many examples in this of my personal experiences of recording the Western experience of chaos about us. And then there was a Professor Andrew Rotter, an American historian. He did research on US foreign policy towards India and some CIA, FBI, government documents, presidential documents during the era of the Cold War. He was doing research on that, and some of these documents got declassified. So some of those documents also show the American attitude towards India as a land of chaos, a very unreliable ally, because there's so much chaos, because Indians are polytheistic, they don't have moral certainty. We are monotheistic, we know the truth is one. They have so many gods and so many truths and so many paths that you don't know how, if you can trust the guy. If the guy tells you something, the other guy will tell you something else. This, what I call the cognitive experience of chaos, was their way of dismissing India as a reliable, serious civilization that they can trust as an ally, because it was too chaotic, and all the images that would go back would show a lot of people, a lot of chaos, everything like that. So it actually has influenced US foreign policy, whereas if they see themselves as very orderly. So I take this attitude towards order and chaos as something balanced in our civilization. We balance the order and the chaos, neither eliminating this or that. They both have a role, and you cannot have just one without the other, like two sides of a coin. Whereas the Western civilization from biblical times on says that Eden is a very orderly place and satanic realm is very chaotic. The realm of Satan, devil, is very chaotic. And the goal is to eliminate that. So when something is characterized as chaos, subconsciously in their mind, it is something evil, immoral, something wrong. You have to fix it. So this idea of development as turning chaos into order and progressiveness and being defined in a particular way, unfortunately, we have not questioned it, we have not challenged it, we have simply adopted it and started doing it to ourselves. So a whole lot of, decentralized commerce, businesses that were run by individual entrepreneurs, some street vendor, there. We are getting rid of it and replacing it a very American-style corporate, organized, orderly structure, getting rid of this chaos, so to speak. And this results in concentration of power. A few people become richer and richer, and the average thousands of people, the street vendors were replaced with one big supermarket. They're employee of somebody. India has more self-employed people, individual entrepreneurs, than any other country in the world. And that's because of the nature of our society has encouraged individualism, individual entrepreneurship. So one way Indians are different than Chinese, and I use this to explain to Americans when they ask me the question, is that Chinese are organized in large state-owned enterprise. So all the taxiwalas are everywhere. There's no self-owned that he runs one taxi. Everybody's like an employee working for a big company. So if there are street vendors, they're all employees of some big company that runs 50,000 street vendors. They're just an employee, like somebody in the cash register in a supermarket. The Indian idea that you are individual is very philosophically different. And it comes from our metaphysics, it comes from our Dharma, the idea of myself as being self-contained, and I have my own Swadharma. It may be different than your Swadharma, and I do my Swadharma, you do your Swadharma, we're all fine. This is very, very different. So I bring our metaphysics, philosophy, spiritual tradition, and Dharma in terms of computer thought, quantum physics, modern organization, and how we are different. And if we know our difference, we can utilize it. We can become better. We are more creative because of some of these differences. We can do more problem solving using parallel processing more creatively. So if we teach this difference to our students, we can actually have a competitive edge over others. Also, knowing difference means when you negotiate with the Westerners, when you go in your future careers, you will be meeting them as employees or employers or partners or competitors or suppliers, whatever. If you know your mind, and you're very clear on it, you can project yourself better with confidence. And if you know how they are and where they're different, you can actually utilize that in dealing with them and negotiating with them. This is why the British East India Company set up so many dozens of institutions to study India, both in Britain and in India, because they said the way to rule over them, the way to negotiate with them and deal with them and be very crafty is to understand all the details about who they are, how they are. And so the British invested a lot of money in Indology. So as Indians are becoming important on the world stage, we need to study the other on our own terms. And that's the project of this book. I thank you for listening. Namaskar.
So you said you expect the Westerners to add some Sanskrit words to the English language.
No, I expect Indians to add them.
Oh.
Yeah, I expect that my whole talk was on that there are certain Sanskrit words which do not have an equivalent in English, and therefore when you remove those words, you remove that experience. So for example, dosa, if you replace it and call it paratha, then you lost something unique that the dosa is. Or if you call it a pancake, or if you call it a South Indian pizza, if you forget the word dosa, you've lost something which is very unique. Not better, worse, but it is something different and unique. Same way, language of a certain culture contains that culture's experience, which maybe some other culture did not have. So I therefore feel that certain words of Sanskrit ought to be introduced into the English language. We already introduced dosa. In the English language, you will call it dosa. And we already introduced yoga. So I am just saying that there are some more words of that kind that are very important. And this is not a job for Westerners, it's something we should do.
Sir, but we still are studying English and many other languages. We don't put Dharma and all. So how do you expect the younger generation to use those words?
Okay, so this is our challenge. I'm not saying that we stop using English. I think you didn't hear me right, because I made very clear. I have no problem that you're using English. You should keep using English. But there are certain words that you can add. Your vocabulary of English is thousands. You can add 50 more words and it's not going to be a serious problem. It's interesting when I have a Western audience and I tell them that, look, I'm going to tell you how Shakti is different than just energy. They're very fascinated. They're learning something new which they did not know. Yeah. It may be a complex that Indians have, that we don't want to stand out and be different from them because we have a complex about ourselves, and therefore we better not project ourselves through the use of words. But when I explain correctly the certain words, when I explain correctly in detail, I give whole seminars on how Dharma is different from religion. The Westerners are very interested because maybe they can learn something from it. It's like if you are a pizza chef and you find that there is something called dosa, and the dosa chef says, I'll tell you why it's different, what is different about it. A good chef will want to learn because he learned something else. So if a civilization has an inferiority complex, it will say we should get rid of anything that reminds us of who we are. But if a civilization doesn't have an inferiority complex, it will say we have something distinct, just like we're learning from you, you can also learn from us. And it is not that we are teaching you, but we're also, at least to teach our own children, we should keep those words intact. So that's what the purpose of this is.
You had mentioned how you had noticed in a group of 7 Indians and a few other Westerners were talking together. The Indians would all talk amongst each other, A to B, C to D, all in parallel, which the Westerners found very confusing. I was wondering though if the reason is because they were not used to chaos. Like for example, when I was in the US, I would attend student meetings with the Indian undergrads, the Indian Undergraduate Student Association, and the student meeting with the Indian Grad Student Association. In the first group, they would be mostly raised in the US. The students would be raised in the US. In the second group, they would be mostly raised in India, but they went to the US for grad school. And what I noticed is, in the first group, whenever we had these get-togethers or events we were organizing, when we had meetings, the students would always silently sit and listen to the person who's running the meeting. If anybody had a question, they raised their hand and waited for their turn. Whereas, when we would ask the grad students to maintain this kind of silence, they would not be able to do it. And I wondered if it was just more a lack of discipline or self-control where they couldn't hold themselves quiet, rather than, other reasons.
See this comfort and habit of multitasking, lot of parallel processing, is not necessarily better or worse, but it is different. Yeah. Now, the better part is that you can handle unpredictable situations. It also is a source of creativity. You can improvise. Indian music, you improvise the rag when each time you're playing it. It is not written notes, and you perform like a tape recorder, like in the Western orchestra. Indian dance, you improvise. So Indians are good at improvising, and there is a survival skill like that. Now, there is also a problem. It is not just one way. The problem is that certain situations require order. And if you don't know how to be orderly, and you can only be disorderly, chaotic, individualistic, too individualistic, going my own way, then large complex projects which require teamwork, cooperation, discipline, you will suffer. So for example, in the military, you don't want a guy who says, "Arey, I do my own way, I do my own jugaad, which means I improvise." You can't accept that. Or if you have any complex project in engineering, you do not want somebody who's doing it his own way, not bothered with what everybody else is doing. So ideally, we need the balance between order and chaos. We need the balance between normative, simple laws and rules which tell us, right, wrong, these are the procedures, top down, listen to the boss, somebody telling you what to do. That is very important. And also the ability to be individually okay on your own, not guided by someone, not directed by someone, but in inner voice guiding you and taking you where you need to go. So there is a difference between the inner and the outer direction when you talk about the order versus chaos. And a balanced human being is one who has mastered both. He knows in this situation I have to conform to some rules and some decisions, some resolutions that were made, and we must, if we all work together and conform, we will be outperforming the other team. So that is one kind of situation. There is another kind of situation where there is nobody, the boss never showed up. Now I have to figure out how to work. I can't say I'm sitting doing nothing because there's no boss today, no one will tell me. I have to improvise. Or creativity. Artists are generally individualistic workers. Most art of any kind is not sort of a big collective effort. The thinking is done, imaginative work is done, original work is done by somebody. Implementing may require a lot of people doing the construction work. So creativity is necessary that our system has, but also an orderly project management, large-scale deployment is necessary. Now I study Harappan civilization, the Indus Valley civilization. It's very orderly. So it means that in our civilization we also had that. Because to build identical bricks, identical weighing systems, all the standards that existed, my foundation has come up with many books on Harappan and Indus Valley civilization. You can get them on the net. The amount of organization and order and standards and uniformity is absolutely staggering. So it is not that comfort with chaos means that you must only live in chaos. It is the ability to go back and forth and strike the balance for a given situation.
We often adopt Western methods because we find them convenient in running a home or running an organization. So how do we strike a balance between finding them convenient and using our own traditional methods in doing our daily or day-to-day activities?
See, I feel that the right balance is like in China, they're teaching Chinese civilization and Mandarin as the first language of every person, mother tongue, and their own sense of history and their own philosophy. Then after a certain age, they teach English and Western thought so that the person has both. This way the person is anchored and rooted in who he is, and he also then later gets the best ideas from other people, he can bring them. But he doesn't lose his bearings, he doesn't lose his anchors, he doesn't lose his coordinates, he knows who he is. So in a good balance of education, I would raise the kid making sure they know the mother tongue and they know our traditional system of Dharma and our philosophy and metaphysics. I would teach them that. And then I would, as they grow up, I would also keep introducing more and more of the Western ideas to make sure that this is a global citizen. I feel I competed with everybody in the world. I never stopped being a proud Hindu. I went and I owned companies. I had thousands of employees working for me. I used to be a corporate vice president in one of the largest companies. Being proud and very clear about my civilizational foundation was never a handicap. Nobody bothered. I did not accept anybody's challenging me that I'm being different. And I found that it was a source of pride and a source of confidence, and people respected me more because I wasn't self-ashamed. People respect you more. The reason people respect China is because the Chinese are very proud that we are Chinese, and the Indians are very begging everyone. You see, this is very interesting point. United States has an annual human rights report on different countries. The reaction from India and China is very opposite. when they produce, India's got these human rights going on, then our minister goes and apologizes and sorry sir, don't put us on sanctions list, we'll do better next year. He's apologetic. China response is that within 2 weeks they do a human rights report on United States. Chinese are saying we have our own criteria of human rights. According to your criteria, we're violating the human rights, but according to our criteria, you've got homeless people, you've got unemployed people, you've got people on the street, you have inequality, the rich are getting richer. According to us, you're violating human rights, you're violating human rights in Iraq and all these countries, even in your own country and all that. So this is a sense of self-confidence. Now they're becoming exceedingly modern and exceedingly competitive, and there are more patents in technology being filed in China than in the United States. You should know that. So the next generation of all this, new technologies and nanotechnology and clean energy, the Chinese investing a lot of money because they have money now to invest in it. So they are not losing their sense of who they are while becoming world-class competitors. And Japanese were the same. Japanese during their big era, there's 40 years, 50 years of great progress and prosperity after World War II, never stopped their own culture, never forgot their own identity and sense of who they are. And yet, Japanese figured out the Western markets, how to beat them in automobiles, how to beat them in electronics, how to beat them in all of that stuff, without losing a sense of who they are. Now, in the case of India, I do not think it's a binary trade-off that, do I be traditional, do I be modern, competitive. I think our tradition does not have a conflict with science and technology, as Swamiji was making the point earlier, we were talking privately. Our tradition has no problem with being practical. So there is no reason to disown our tradition in order to be practical guy. I lived a very practical life. I left India to go and get a PhD at the age of 20. I went to the United States. And I succeeded in so many careers. And I owe it to a certain security that my tradition gave me, a sense of confidence, a problem-solving, creative thinking skills, learning to work with many people, dharmic values, meditation, sadhana. I owe my success to all of that. And there is no reason why young people should abandon that, thinking that they'll come out ahead.
Very fascinating how you talked about parallel thinking in Indians and sort of linear thinking in Americans. I just remember my first assignment, group assignment that we all worked on in Florida. There were 3 Indians in the group and about 7 or 8 people from other countries. We were just discussing the problem that was given, and about 15 minutes into the discussion, we just realized that nobody else was talking. Only the Indians were talking. And we were talking amongst each other, to each other, and we were in some sort of flow, right? And then I stopped first, and then the others stopped, and then we were looking at the rest of them, and they all had this really bewildered look. And they were talking to each other sort of in a hushed voice, and they thought that we were fighting. They thought that the argument had devolved into a fight, is what they thought. Anyway, that's just to...
But that's a very common experience I've had.
Yes, I just wanted to share.
Yeah, it's a very common experience I've had. And the Indians' threshold of complexity is bigger, of disagreement is bigger,
yes.
Of comfort with contradictions is bigger. If you read one chapter out of all, you should read chapter 4, which is called Order and Chaos. This is a chapter called Order and Chaos. You should read that chapter. And that goes into the whole understanding of the Western mind from the Indian point of view. It will help you in your career if you're working with them. It will make you relax. You'll say, okay, this is how they are,
The question now, this is some idea that I've been turning over in my mind for a while now. It's interesting, you talked about the rich getting richer and knowledge and power being concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And I see that is also happening in terms of resources.
Yes.
And not just in India, all over the world.
Yes.
And that could, in some sense, be tied to a source of a lot of conflicts that are evolving in the present and possibly in the future. My question is this. You also talked about the patenting, for instance, in the Chinese system. Now, I find that patents is one way that is really an engine towards concentrating this knowledge and resources in the hands of fewer and fewer people. You're a computer scientist, and there are lots of computer scientists here. Is there a possibility, this is just an idea I'm throwing out in the open for people who might be interested in it, is there a possibility of a FOSS equivalent knowledge resource, which actually has a lot of resonance with our culture, in the sense that whatever we discover is universal. It's not owned by anybody really. Isn't it time that someone, probably people from the Indian tradition, we are probably ideally suited to do it, start something like this?
Yes.
where
I agree with you.
I don't know. I mean, I'm probably not equipped to handle the technological complexity of putting something in place like that. But I just thought
No, but this is a very important point you're making, and we also make it, there's another difference we call integral unity and synthetic unity in this book. And under integral unity, knowledge is all integral and open source, kind of open architecture knowledge. And so, we never patented most of the botany and knowledge of plants and herbs. So much of it came from India into the West. And many things that the West takes for granted as sort of part of their culture. I'm writing a whole volume on Indian contributions to the West that are unacknowledged. And the reason they're unacknowledged is that we didn't have this patent mentality. So some Westerner would get hold of it and call it his and quickly patent it and plagiarize it, claim it as his, and now it's known as that way. So yes, this metaphysics of ego. It's a metaphysics based on the ego and the concept of property. Whereas we had a different concept of self, and rather than personal property, a different concept of shared social resources. So no one person owned the village well. Like you don't own sunshine or air and all that, So there are certain things that are community. And so knowledge is one of them. So therefore you find the great art paintings not signed. There's no nowadays it's changed, MF Hussein it will say, because they were westernized, this idea. So so these things this is a very interesting point you've raised. And one of the ways India can contribute to the world is bringing these kind of ideas for the future of humanity. That if you were less selfish and more sharing in knowledge and intellectual property, like we have been in our tradition, maybe the world would be a better place. And so this is another reason that some of the things in our civilization we do not want to give up, we want to preserve, because it's not a matter of chauvinism and superiority, it's a matter of sharing, and maybe the world will be a better place if we contribute in this manner.